Welcome to Cupcakes and Clarity, the podcast for high-achieving women who want success and fulfillment without burning it all down. I'm your host, Lisa Pirinelli, and every Tuesday I'm bringing you honest conversations and practical strategies to help you create more balance, purpose, and joy in your work and your life. Think of this as a heart-to-heart with a trusted friend. Together we'll get real about the challenges you face, and you'll leave every episode feeling clear, confident, and inspired to make your next chapter your best one yet. Welcome back to Cupcakes and Clarity. I'm your host, Lisa Pirinelli, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's conversation isn't really about making decisions. At least that's not where we're going to start, because I have a feeling you wouldn't even say you're trying to make a decision. You might say you're overwhelmed, tired, or restless, or your plate is too full or too busy. You just feel a little disconnected from yourself. And maybe life looks pretty good from the outside, but something just feels off and it's draining. And you can't always explain it. You just know you don't feel like yourself anymore. And if that's where you are today, I want you to know something before we go any further. You're not alone. And I don't think you're broken. I think something else may be happening, something I see all the time in my coaching practice. And today we're going to explore what that is. And by the end of the episode, I hope you'll walk away understanding not only why you've been feeling this way, but one simple step you can take to begin feeling lighter. But before we jump in, I want to share this week's cupcake moment. And if you're new here, this is the part of the episode where I share a little story of joy, connection, or clarity from everyday life. Because while we're always talking about meaningful things on this podcast, I never want us to miss the beauty that's already happening around us, all the blessings. So recently, my family went on our annual vacation, but this year we shared it with another family, and it completely changed the dynamic, but in the best way. Our vacations are usually pretty laid back, but this one was full of laughter and adventures and late nights playing euchre and nonstop memory making and watching the kids just have so much fun. It was amazing. And it was such a gift to experience our favorite place with people we genuinely enjoy spending time with, and watching our families connect brought me so much joy. And after they headed home, we had a couple of days left on our own, and something interesting happened. Once that excitement settled, I realized just how much energy we'd been running on. I was physically and emotionally spent. My tank was empty. Now, thankfully, my family was more than happy to slow down. We spent those last couple of days doing almost nothing. I even read an entire hardback book from the library, which, if you're an audiobook person like me, you know that is saying something. And I really, really enjoyed this book. I would love to share it with you because it's a fun fiction book, but my mom brain is not allowing me to remember it at the moment. So I will put it in the show notes in case you're interested, because it was a fun read. And I read it in almost a day, maybe like a day and a half. So it's totally doable. And then as I reflected on our trip, I realized how much I needed both experiences. I needed the fun, the connection, the laughter, and the adventure. And I also needed the quiet, the slower pace, the space to recharge before jumping back into everyday life. And it was such a simple reminder that sometimes the healthiest thing we can do isn't choose between two good things. It's to recognize what we need in this season and give ourselves permission to honor it. And interestingly enough, I think that's exactly where this episode is going to go today. So, speaking of real life, have you ever noticed that you can go through an entire day, you can answer the emails, you sit through the meetings, you make dinner, help with the homework, fold the laundry, crash or crawl into bed, and then feel like you've been carrying something heavy all day? And nothing terrible happened. There was no crisis, no big conflict, No obvious reason to feel so mentally or emotionally tired. And yet, there it is, that feeling. Maybe you've blamed it on being busy, or maybe you've wondered if you're just burned out. And maybe you even told yourself you just need a vacation. And sometimes those things are true. But after years of coaching women, I've noticed something else. Many of the women who come to me aren't exhausted simply because they have too much to do. They're exhausted because they're living in this space between knowing something needs to change and not knowing what to do about it. So let's think about that for just a second, because it's an uncomfortable place to live. You know the current version of your life isn't quite fitting or enjoyable, and it's not sustainable anymore, but you don't know what the next version looks like. So you just keep going, doing what you've always done, hoping someday you'll wake up and suddenly know exactly what to do, or it will just magically be calmer, more aligned, more freeing. What I find interesting, though, is that when women first come to me, they almost never say, Lisa, I need help making a decision. I mean, sometimes maybe they do in a certain way, but most time that's not, it's not that direct. Instead, they say things like, I'm stretched too thin. I don't like the way my work has taken over my life. I feel stuck. I should be grateful, but I'm just not happy. Or I feel like I've lost myself and I don't know what's next. I don't know where to start so that things can just feel better. So does any of that sound familiar? Because many times what feels like overwhelm or restlessness or dissatisfaction is actually something much quieter. It's an unresolved decision. It's not always a big dramatic decision. And sometimes it's simply the decision you've been postponing because you don't yet know the quote unquote right answer. Should you ask for help? Who could even help without waving a magic wand to take half of the load off your plate? Whether to have that difficult conversation at work or at home, or whether to change jobs, whether to protect your time. And how would you even do that or go about doing that? How's that even possible when everyone needs something from you? Whether to finally admit that something isn't working anymore and it just sits there quietly beneath the surface. And because you haven't named it, it quietly begins shaping your days. And it settles nice and tight, so willing to lead your choices in a way you don't even realize it's driving you towards even more of what is causing the disconnect. And here's one of the biggest myths we believe. We think that if we don't make a decision, then it just is what it is, that you didn't take any action yet. But that's actually not true. Not deciding is still deciding, because it's a decision. Even if it's a quiet one, it's a decision to wait, a decision to postpone, a decision to tolerate things the way they are. Sometimes that is exactly the right decision. There are seasons where waiting is the wise choice, where gathering more information totally makes sense, and where giving something more time is the healthiest choice. But here's the difference. Waiting intentionally brings peace. Waiting unintentionally creates weight. And many of us don't realize we've been carrying that weight for weeks, months, or sometimes even years. And it's not because we're weak or incapable, but it's because we never realized that the undecided was making decisions for us. It was deciding how much mental energy we carried into each day, and it was deciding how often we'd second guess ourselves. It was deciding how present we could be with the people we love. And that one hurts a lot. Most of us are really wanting to be present with our families, whether it's kids or our husbands, our loved ones, our friends. But when we're not, they see it and it impacts them. A decision you haven't consciously made is still shaping the life you're consciously living. So if you've been listening and thinking, okay, maybe there is a decision underneath all of this. You've been thinking about whatever it is you're thinking about, and you're like, yeah, okay, maybe. I want to gently suggest something else. The decision probably isn't the thing keeping you stuck. It's the story you're telling yourself about the decision. Because what I've experienced after all these years of coaching women is that two people can face the exact same decision, and one moves forward with confidence and the other stays stuck for months. The difference usually isn't the decision, it's the invisible belief sitting underneath it. So that's called the invisible rule. When I start working with a client, I don't usually begin by asking, "So, what are you going to do?" Instead, I'm curious about something else. I want to understand what has become true for you that you haven't questioned in a long time. Because so often, that's where the real work begins. And maybe the invisible rule sounds like, I should know what to do by now. Or if I make the wrong decision, I'll ruin everything. If I choose myself, someone else will be disappointed. Or I need to feel completely confident before I move forward. I can't change my mind now. I've invested too much. But those are not facts. They're interpretations. And many of them were learned long before we realized they were shaping our lives. And when we don't question them, they quietly become the lens through which every decision gets filtered. So imagine trying on a pair of glasses that slightly change the color of everything you see. So there's this one picture I have of my husband and I in the airport on our honeymoon. And it's like, we kind of took a selfie and I'm in these pink shades, which, these pink glasses, which I'm sure at the time were super cool. I look back and think, you can tell my confidence in those cool pink glasses was just shining through, me on my honeymoon, all tan. And, so I really love those. I wish I still had them to this day. Just don't know if I could rock them quite as confidently anymore. So you've got these glasses on, and at first you notice, but after wearing them all day, you stop realizing they're there. And eventually you don't think, these glasses are changing my view. You think this is just what the world looks like. And our assumptions work the same way. We stop recognizing them as assumptions. They simply become reality. And until we notice the lens, every decision we make continues to be shaped by it. So I think this is where coaching is really different. I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions people have about coaching. They think they're hiring someone to give them answers. I don't actually believe that's my job. My job isn't to give women better answers. My job is to help them question the assumptions that have been keeping them from asking the right questions. Because once the right question changes, the decision often changes with it, or at least it becomes much clearer. So this reminds me of a client I worked with while she was going through a corporate restructure, and she'd been told she was going to be getting laid off. And she'd been with that company many years. She'd invested a very significant amount of her life into working for that company. So you can imagine this is a big turning point for her. Emotionally felt very heavy. And so she came into our first session convinced she needed to decide whether to stay in her career or leave. Should she try to find a job within the corporate setting, whether it's that one or a different company, or should she leave and try to go do something that she's always dreamed of doing, or a hobby or whatever? So she had been making lists. She had talked to friends and family. She was going back and forth for weeks. She thought the decision was the problem. But after we'd been talking for a while, I asked her a question she'd never considered. And I'd asked, what feels like it has to be true before you're allowed to make this decision? And she answered, I have to know I'm making the right choice. So I asked, can anyone actually know that? And she sort of laughed softly because she could finally hear herself that she was expecting the guarantee that no one can offer. And it's not like at that moment she suddenly knew exactly what to do, but she realized she'd been asking herself to do something impossible. So she stopped waiting for certainty She started looking for clarity. And from that moment on, we weren't trying to predict her future anymore. We were simply helping her build it intentionally. This also reminds me of a story, of one of my own stories. So I'd love to share one of my own experiences with you. And it's not because I think my story is unique, but because I think you'll recognize pieces of your own story in it. So I remember many years ago, I was sitting in my car after work one day and thinking, is this really it? Is this what the next 20 years are supposed to feel like? Because that had been in my thoughts often. Can I make it another 20 plus years until I could retire with full benefits? I worked for like a legacy Fortune 500 company that's what most people ahead of me had done. They had locked and loaded into their career to try to retire because the benefit package was amazing and had a pension, which had I stayed and done that, the reality is that all went away anyway through time. But at the time, that was a big draw. So when my physical and mental health took the biggest hit, when I was absolutely at my lowest, I was making the most money I'd ever made. My job was a coveted role that carried responsibility. It garnered respect in my field. I loved my family. I loved my home. And I even did those self-care type things. I did massages and hair and nail appointments. I thought I was taking care of myself. So why was I falling apart? Why did I feel so stretched thin and like money was a problem and I simply wasn't enjoying life? I felt a disconnect from my work, and it deeply impacted me showing up in my life as the present, calm, fun, and stable person I once was and still craved to be. I felt guilt for knowing I had this good career in life, like I was ungrateful about what I had been given and created. But that's just it. I wasn't really owning that everything I had was something I created. In my choices or lack thereof, I was in control of my life. Now, not every circumstance of work or life, but my life was in my hands. And I was not seeing my part in how it was moving in a direction I no longer wanted. You've probably heard the saying, you can't read the label from inside the jar. Well, that was me. And I was too depleted to have a truly unbiased internal conversation without blaming or shaming myself, and was giving way too much power to thinking it was too late to really make it better. I believed it was too late since I had already invested 10 plus years into my career. I believed I had to completely change my circumstances to live a life with more freedom in my time, better health, and to be fun and light again. I believed I needed to have enough money saved to basically retire, or at least enough to match my annual salary before I could leave my job. Yet I had not been able to do that in the 10 plus years that I had been working there to completely save all that money. I believed I needed more confidence and a bigger, braver personality to be successful on my own terms. What finally helped me see things differently was seeking solutions and examples of what was possible. Learning to believe in myself and look at what I had created in my life as having incredible experience in resiliency and tenacity and determination. I had faith and I had purpose, even if I didn't know exactly where yet. And through coaching, I had others that helped me see what was possible and create this safe space to dream again without forcing action, but encouraging intentional decisions that helped me bit by bit get back into alignment with what truly mattered most to me. So if this is resonating, I don't want you to just understand today's episode. I want you to leave differently than when you started. So I'd love to coach you through something right now. And you don't need a journal. You don't need to pause the episode. I just want you to stay with me. I want you to think of one thing that's been weighing on you lately. Not 5 things, just one. Maybe it's a decision you've been putting off. Or maybe it's simply that lingering feeling that something needs to change. You don't have to know exactly what that is. You can just know that it's that feeling. that something needs to change. That in itself is powerful. Now, instead of asking, what should I do? I want you to ask yourself something different. What am I assuming has to be true before I can move forward? I want you to take a moment and really think about it, because our first answer is often the surface answer. So if you stay with it just a little longer, you can discover what is the assumption underneath. So if we go back to the example of even my story, if you asked me at the time, if I asked myself, what am I assuming has to be true before I can move forward? It was most likely going to be, I need to have, 6 figures saved before I can make any kind of decision to move or leave. I really believed at the surface level, that's what I needed. I was telling myself that. So what is the assumption underneath of all of that? Is that I need that a certain amount of money to be able to do that. That is the assumption. That 6 figures is the only way to move forward. Now, question 2. If that assumption weren't true, what suddenly becomes possible? Not what would you do, just what becomes possible. And sometimes possibility shows up before certainty ever does. So again, on my example of needing, 6 figures saved before I can leave my job. If that isn't true, if I didn't need that, what suddenly becomes possible? Well, goodness gracious, I could leave. Like I could leave so much sooner, because in my case, I did have savings. I did have money saved. I did have other things going for me. So if that wasn't true, then I absolutely could leave. So just think about that for yourself. What was your answer? Now, one final question, and this one is my favorite. You may even be able to guess what it is, because I think it's the one that changes everything. And it's not what's the safest choice, not what's the smartest choice, not what will everyone else think. Instead, what matters most to me? Because here's something I've learned. The goal isn't to become someone who's never uncertain. The goal is to become someone who knows what matters most, so uncertainty no longer gets to make your decisions for you. Uncertainty will always be a part of life, but it doesn't have to be in charge. So, if those questions felt different, that's because they are. Notice, I never asked you to predict the future. I never asked you to guarantee the outcome. I didn't even ask you to make a list of pros and cons. Instead, we started somewhere else. We noticed what was quietly shaping your thinking, and we questioned it. We came back to what matters most to you. And from there, the next step usually becomes much easier to see. And that's the work I love, not because I have the answers, but because I get to watch women reconnect with their own. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I don't think I've ever asked myself those questions before, or at least not in that way, you're not alone. And honestly, that's exactly why I created the Freedom Map Clarity session. It's not about me telling you what to do. It's about creating the space for you to uncover what's really underneath the overwhelm, the uncertainty, or the feeling that something just isn't fitting anymore. If today's coaching questions help you see something you hadn't seen before, imagine what we can do and to uncover in 90 minutes together. It's not only fun, but it's so productive. Together, we discover what's been shaping your decisions, reconnect with what matters most to you, and create a practical path forward that feels aligned with the life you actually want to build. If that sounds exactly what you've been needing, I'd love to walk you through that process. So you can find the link in today's show notes. So before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one small step. And it's not because it's going to solve everything overnight, but because I've learned that clarity isn't usually found in one giant leap. It's built through small, intentional choices that reflect what's most important to you. So here's your freedom step for the week. I want you to notice every time you catch yourself saying one of these phrases: I should, I have to, I can't, or maybe I just need a little more time. So I should, I have to, I can't, or I just need a little more time. And don't judge yourself. Goodness gracious, no, we're not here to judge ourselves. We're just here to notice. And then pause and ask yourself one question. Is this coming from what matters most to me, or from an assumption I've never questioned? And you don't have to change anything in that moment. Just notice, because awareness is often where freedom begins. And if there's one decision that's been quietly following you around, the one that keeps showing up when you're trying to fall asleep or on your drive home from work or during those quiet moments when life finally slows down, I want to invite you to do something, not to make the decision today, not to force clarity, but to stop pretending it isn't there. Simply name it. Write it down, give it words, because something interesting happens when we stop carrying everything in our heads and we bring it into the light. We can finally begin responding to it intentionally instead of reacting to it unconsciously. And sometimes that's the bravest first step. So at the beginning of today's episode, I said that many women don't come to me saying, Lisa, I need help making a decision. They come saying, I feel overwhelmed or something feels off. I don't know what's wrong with me. I hope today helped you see that maybe nothing is wrong with you. You are not the problem. Maybe you've simply been carrying the weight of something that has never meant to be carried indefinitely. Maybe it's an unresolved conversation, an unspoken truth, an unmade decision. And here's what I want you to remember. Not making a decision doesn't stop your life from moving forward. It simply allows the decision to quietly shape your life without your permission. And that's why awareness matters, not because awareness magically fixes everything, but because once you can see what's shaping your life, what's been doing that, you finally have the opportunity to choose something different. I want to leave you with one last thought. Life is always going to have uncertainty. There will always be seasons where you wish someone could tell you exactly what to do. And I wish I could tell you that someday uncertainty disappears. It doesn't, but something else happens instead. You become more deeply rooted in what matters most to you. And when that happens, uncertainty loses its power to make your decisions for you. The goal isn't to become someone who's never uncertain. The goal is to become someone who knows what matters most so strongly that uncertainty no longer gets to make those decisions for you. And that doesn't mean every decision becomes easy, but it does mean they become more aligned. And over time, those small aligned decisions become a life that feels more like your own. So before we wrap up, I have one more invitation for you. If today's episode resonated with you and you're in the Indianapolis area, I'd love to meet you in person. On September 15th, I'll be speaking at the Fuel Your Future event, where we'll be diving in even deeper into creating a life and a career that's aligned with what matters most. If you've been looking for an opportunity to step away from the day-to-day, invest in yourself, and spend time with other amazing women who are asking similar questions, I hope you'll join us. You'll find all the details in the show notes, and I'd truly love to see you there. I think it'll be so much fun. So thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I know your time and your attention are valuable, and it means so much that you've chosen to spend part of your day here with me. So thank you. And until next time, keep noticing the moments that bring you joy. Keep coming back to what matters most. And remember, you don't have to know exactly where you're going next. You just need to stop letting yesterday's assumptions make tomorrow's decisions. I'll see you on the next episode of Cupcakes and Clarity. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Cupcakes and Clarity. If today's conversation inspired you and you'd like even more tips and strategies tailored to your life, go to lisapirinelli.com/resources for more self-guided tools. And if you're ready for personal support to help you navigate what's holding you back, I'd love to meet you. Head over to lisapirinelli.com to schedule your free consultation call. New episodes drop every Tuesday, so be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean so much if you shared it with a friend or leave a quick review. Until next time, here's to creating more clarity, confidence, and joy in your life, one cupcake at a time.